Welcome to I'm So Obsessed, where we talk with actors, artists, and creators about their work, career, and current obsession. I'm your host, Patrick Holland, and today, my guest is the lead singer of the band System of a Down, Serj Tankian. The band is a mix of punk, metal, and Armenian folk music, and in 2006, they won a Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance of their song, BYOB, Bring Your Own Bombs. The new film, Truth to Power, follows Serj and System of a Down from their formation, their fight for social justice for Armenians, and how they developed their unique sound. This interview was recorded at the beginning of February. Serj, I'm so excited to talk to you about this film, but let's just start with some of the basics. So just for a general overview, tell me about Truth to Power.
Sure. So originally the idea started as a POV film. In 2011, I knew I was going to have the most kind of exciting professional year with different projects and different bands to perform with, and, System of a Down, orchestras, and my backup band, the FCC, and working on 3 different types of records, 3 different genres. I thought, wow, I should record this year. So I strapped cameras onto my head at different times, even buy little spy glasses at points and HD cameras and whatever, and just shot everything that I did. So the idea was to make a POV film. Once I started really looking at the footage, I realized that I'm going to make people throw up because I'm more like a bird. My head turns too often. I'm not really perfect for POV type of stuff. But the idea of having this experiential film seen through the eyes of an artist still stuck with me. And what I was interested in, more than showing the backstage idea of an artist or from the eyes of an artist, was really wanting to showcase an activist journey. And so he really kind of took the helms at that point, and it became a different film altogether. And we have used some of my POV stuff for fun kind of fillers, if you will, stories of touring or whatever. But the majority of the story became this kind of passionate artist journey from a point where an artist has an activist journey from a point where the activist has very little voice at the beginning of his artistic career, and then later it becomes more pronounced, and the effects of that and the far-reaching effects of that, both positive and negative, the repercussions of being an artist and an activist, etc., it became Truth to Power.
I think I'm really fascinated, though, is that through line and how kind of the growth of the band is interwoven, especially with the history of Armenia, the Armenian Genocide. And when you see the activism, especially going through some of the old footage of the band, the activism that your band was doing starting out versus where it's grown to now, what's your reaction to that?
It's been incredible. Most activists don't have the privilege of seeing the work that they do, the effect of the work that they do. It's hard to gauge the effect of an activist's work, right? But, seeing the Congress of the United States in December 2019 formally recognized the Armenian Genocide after many, many years of hard work, of awareness on the part of the band, along with the Armenian American community at large, really was like this incredible kind of feeling of, wow, that we had some type of effect. We felt the effect of our activism as artists, and that's really unique and beautiful. I used to get a lot of letters, still do, emails, sent to the office or whatever, saying, I didn't know about the Armenian Genocide. I learned about it through the band, and now I'm doing my book report in high school about it, or my essay, in university or whatever. There are people that have taught their teachers about it, and their teachers had to actually go and do their own research and come back and go, okay, now I know what's going on. So it's huge, and that's one example. There's many other platforms that as activists I've undertaken, and the band even has undertaken. But to me, that is one of the most obvious ones. So it's really a privilege, honestly.
Well, and I think you mentioned this in the film that, and if I say this wrong, please correct me, that it was your grandfather who, I don't think he used the word activist, but he wanted you to speak up for the voice of Armenia through your art. And was that kind of the spark for you? Because I don't feel like people there are maybe some people who say, I want to be an activist, and they are an activist. Most people just fight for what they believe in. I guess I'm wondering, where did that spark come from for you?
For me, I became an activist because I was an Armenian in the U.S. and the government, and even though four of my grandparents were survivors of the genocide with horrific stories of how their families perished, nonetheless, the government of the United States never officially recognized the genocide. And to me, that made me feel like, wait a minute, if I'm in a well-known democracy, denying a historical truth for political expediency or economic reasons with a NATO ally, Turkey, then how many other truths are there out there that are being denied for, similar kind of nefarious reasons, be they economic or political? And that made me an activist.
It's a great way of putting it. And then I want to talk about the music too, because I feel you have so many different outlets artistically. You're a singer, a poet, songwriter, an artist, an activist, a composer. But early in the film, you mentioned that you were writing poetry before you wrote songs. How did you know when a line you wrote would make a good lyric versus a good line in a poem, or a poem you wrote would be a good song or just a good poem?
I mean, I wrote a lot of poetry just because I had the habit of writing every day, and earlier on. And as I was playing music, and I wasn't as proficient as I was more proficient with words than music when I first started out. And over time, I played more and more music. Now I'm actually more focused on composing than I am on lyrical writing or poetry. I don't write, unfortunately, as much as I would like to or should, as far as be they poems or journals or anything in terms of thoughts and feelings. It's just the way it is. My art has gone into multiple directions, and I'm more prolific musically, I guess. But yeah, at the time, I was way more a word man than a bird man.
I love that. Well, and I wonder too, because when like System of a Down writes a song, what happens first? Is it the lyrics, or is it the music, or a combination of both? Like, how does that work?
Over time, that changed. Originally, Darren would bring in music because, again, I wouldn't bring in as much music earlier on because I was mostly the word man, and I would bring in the lyrics. Over time, I think we both kind of enriched the other aspects that we lacked. So I started doing more music, and he started doing more lyrics as well. So that kind of gets into the discography of System of a Down as you go on further into the later records, and so that changes. And mostly he would bring in a song, and in the later days, like let's say Hypnotize, Mesmerize, and he would have lyrical content, or at least partial lyrical content, or at least a lyrical idea for a song. And I was doing the same thing. If I brought in a song, I would usually have full lyrics and full music, and maybe make some arrangement changes based on likes and dislikes of the band members and how they want to play to the song and whatnot, or add a part to it, etc. So, we were never the type of band that jammed a tune out and created stuff in the studio together. Maybe a few songs, but from a repertoire of 5-6 records, a few songs is not much.
One of my favorite scenes in the film is you and Rick Rubin talking about the first time he saw System of a Down perform. And what was that working relationship like on Toxicity?
Rick is an incredible human being, first and foremost, and an amazing friend. And he has this way of making artists feel incredibly comfortable so that they can do their best without anyone forcing them to. And he does that just organically because he is truly a fan of music. And when he likes a certain band or a certain sound, certain artist, he really becomes the uber fan of that music and really gets into the nitty gritty of it and understands and kind of really gets it, and that helps with the vision of what you're trying to create as an artist. So, Rick has produced pretty much all of System's records. He's influenced the way that I produce my own music and hear things. Like I still hear him when I sing, when I do vocals. Most of my music now is instrumental for films or whatever. But when I'm doing vocals, I still hear him in my head going, pronounce it better, pronounce it better. It truly is like you learn a lot, and he's really a very spiritual dude too. He's like, taught me a lot about being in the moment when you're writing, and also if something's not coming to you, kind of open the doors so that other influences can help, the muse can come sooner, and trial and error and all sorts of stuff. No, it's a beautiful relationship. He's been an incredible producer, ally, label head for System of a Down's journey.
And another big part, especially we see in the film Truth to Power, is how touring shaped the band. And I got a few questions about this. One, just because we're kind of still in the midst of a pandemic, how has that affected the fact you're not performing?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there is no performance happening except for in New Zealand. We were actually in New Zealand for 9 months. We lived there part of the year. But yeah, worldwide, that's been, off. Personally, it hasn't affected, I had a whole tour. We had 22 shows with System planned last year that got canceled, and it looks like there's not going to be much this year happening either. I had two film premieres, including Truth to Power, that was going to premiere at Tribeca last year with a full orchestra, and we had a performance planned that went under. I had art exhibits planned that went under. So a lot of events didn't happen. But honestly, it is what it is, right? As an artist, you just go, okay, well, that's not happening. So what do I do now? And so I created a lot of new music as a result. And over time, I think touring is less of what I like to do anyway. I enjoy being on stage. I just don't enjoy all that travel that really kind of wears you out. And I've done it for 25 years, so it's not as creative as I'd like to be. So it didn't really, the touring aspect of it didn't really make me, not touring didn't make me sad in any bit. Not seeing these two films premiere last year did. So
I do want to talk about your orchestral music, but I want to ask one more thing with the tour, because I think something that really attracts people to System of a Down is your vocal performance, and the way you phrase your lyrics. And I'm wondering, just because when you're on tour, how do you keep your voice from going? How do you keep healthy to be able to perform songs like that?
I think the challenge is staying healthy. That's the word that you just mentioned, because if I'm healthy, then your voice is healthy. You're okay. And the challenges of the musical acrobatics, the vocal acrobatics, are just something that I've learned to do. And it's breath techniques, it's some tricks, of voice. It's a combination of everything, but it's a lot of intention and strong kind of belting out. Is no other way of saying it. Also singing beautifully and just kind of really knowing your voice and exercising. I have to get my voice in shape before a tour like an athlete. I can't just go from, I'm not singing Sinatra songs. I wish I was in some cases. But, I have to literally spend 2 weeks to a month continually singing these hard, fast songs over and over again until my voice gets back into shape to be able to do a tour. And then the body as well has to be, you have to work out and be in shape and all of that stuff. And then on tour, something can throw you off. You might get sick, lose your voice, you might, hurt your back, or, whatever. Those things happen. And you got to just deal with those challenges and get around them. And they teach you things as well. I've had shows where my voice was, I was sick, I had fever, but you do the show and you get through it, and people love it anyway. And they're like,
have you ever heard the phrase "Dr. Show Business"? Years ago I did theater, and sometimes people would say if you came in sick, that Dr. Show Business would give you a shot. It's usually adrenaline,
yeah.
And you actually perform really well, but then you just hurt and crash right after.
Totally. Yeah, no, I haven't had those shots, but I have had
metaphorical
oxygen.
shots, I should say.
I have had oxygen, and in places that were, high elevation, where I was having a hard time breathing sometimes, but a couple of times, but nothing major. Never took the big drugs, or not one of those guys, not into it. But just kind of trying to be really up for it. But it is acrobatics. It is vocal acrobatics. It's not easy, but it is fun.
Okay, so there's a film in the scene I want to discuss a little bit, and it's the one around. You talk about the March 1st, 2008 protest in Armenia against. And if I get the name of the president elected wrong, I apologize. It's Serj Tankian. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you wrote this public letter in response to the protest, and he wrote one in return. Were you surprised, A, at the effect your letter had, and B, that he actually wrote you back?
Yes, I was surprised at both. I did write an open letter, so press had published it. Even during the oligarchic corrupt days of Armenia's rule before 2018, Armenia always had a very, very transparent, open press, unlike Turkey and some of our neighbors there. So our press was always kind of thriving. Armenians love to speak their minds, so we can never have a oppressed press. you know so I guess the press had I had written a letter kind of challenging the corruption and ballot rigging that was happening in 2008 at the victory of the then president Serj Tankian. And he did write me back an open letter as well, kind of almost in a very paternalistic way, saying everything will be all right, everything's cool, and using a lot of kind of my own lyrics to kind of explain things. And because I wasn't satisfied with the response, and I was serious, and I basically challenged it, and he left it at that. But years ago, I realized that a lot of Armenian diasporan Armenians who are working to recognize the genocide in different countries in the world, who are trying to get aid to Armenia, they don't want to talk about the ills of that country. And I did, because to me, justice is justice, truth is truth. So yes, I did challenge the previous regime. I was there for the 2018 peaceful Velvet Revolution that changed the country's trajectory, and it became a more progressive democratic nation. And unfortunately, the highs of the beautiful Velvet Revolution didn't last long, because 2.5 years later, we had the attacks by Azerbaijan and Turkey using Syrian mercenaries against a land known as Artsakh, which is the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. Those people that have been living on those lands for 2,500 years, their ancestral homelands, were brutalized and killed, and using banned weaponry and whatnot, white phosphorus, bombs and Grad missiles and Smerch missiles and stuff, and a lot of civilian population were bombed, and so a lot of displacement. It's a human rights travesty that's still reeling right now, even though there's been a ceasefire and Russian peacekeeping troops have entered the area.
Can't help but draw a comparison to a little bit what's going on as we are doing this interview, which is our former president Donald Trump is going through an impeachment trial, and part of that was spurred on by his claims of I wouldn't say election rigging, but the fact that maybe there were ballots that were falsified or miscounted or that aren't valid. What is your reaction when you look at stuff that has actually happened in places like Armenia with election rigging versus something like that's going on in the U.S. right now?
It's quite interesting, because the whole presidency of Donald Trump was a presidency of subjectivity rather than objectivity. It's a point of view rather than facts, and it is the highest level of fake news during this presidency. And in social media, obviously, is more prevalent during his presidency than previous ones, even though it was around obviously since Clinton. And so it's a whole different take. We have seen the data. I mean, is there complications with voting? Are there ways of making certain people not vote and all of that? Yes, I mean, there are problems with voting, but I think the problem with U.S. voting isn't so much fraud; it's access. Using access as a way of turning away certain types of voters, demographically, minorities, etc. And so that's what we need to be aware of. But yeah, the whole thing with the rushing of the capital, that rushing of the capital happened in parliament in Armenia after the Second Artsakh War a couple of months back, and it was like horrible and tragic. I found it to be really bad. And then it happened in America, and I'm like, well, I guess Armenia is not the only one, a small nation. It just have to be a small nation in the Caucasus for that to happen. It could happen anywhere. And you really caught me and a lot of people by surprise that something like that could have happened here. It's shocking and it's scary. I mean, looking at those videos of the House of Representatives and people like crouching and and guns drawn and like that. That shouldn't be going on, man.
So the name of our podcast is called I'm So Obsessed. What's your current obsession?
Because I score films, my current obsession is software synthesizers. More like samples, like contact samples for scoring, and finding perfect sounds and tones, and great sounding instruments of the past or modern. And I love sounds. Like sounds are my current passion. I collect software sample libraries like collectors collect other things. Except that I don't you can't see my hoarding because it's on a drive.
Yeah.
But I use them. I use a lot of them for scoring because each film that I score is usually a different tone, a different song palette, and directors usually want different things. So you end up creating and sometimes creating new sounds and using new sounds for different films, and that so it's actually very useful.
So let's talk a little bit about your compositions, because we were talking about synthetic music or synthesized orchestral stuff just now. But do you remember the first time you heard an orchestra play a piece of music you composed?
Yes, that was in New Zealand, in Auckland. That was the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra, and it was, I want to say, 2008 or 2009. And we actually filmed the whole thing and put out a CD DVD called Elected at Symphony. And since then, I've worked with at least 2 dozen, 3 dozen orchestras around the world and done live shows and heard them play Orca, my symphony, Elected at Symphony, different pieces of music that I've written. And honestly, I gotta say, man, it's one thing I perform with the orchestra, but I also let them just sit back and kind of let them play some of the movements of my symphony. And it is a whole different feeling to be a composer and watch kind of your music come to life without you as a performer, because my whole life's been music as a performer, like I've been on the front and center of the music. It is a really interesting feeling being in the back of it, and I enjoy it more and more because I've done the first a lot, so it's like, cool. Yeah. I released Elasticity, a rock EP that is coming out in March. But I release a lot more instrumental music, for film and for, classical and jazz and all sorts of stuff.
And then when it comes to, we talked a little bit about your growth as an activist and the growth of your art with System of a Down. Like, how has that growth changed as a composer over the years for you? How have you grown as a composer over the years, I should say?
Just working on different films, working with different directors, I've become less and less attached to music itself, what I create, because you're working in a world where someone else ultimately is the decision maker of what goes into the film, right? The director usually, or producer in some cases. And so you really have to kind of do your best and yet be detached from it if there are changes to be made. Now you try your best to get in what you think is going to be the best thing, obviously, and you can fight for it. You can, kind of sway things in certain directions, but I've had to be very detached, and that's taught me a lot. Kind of like mandala paintings that Buddhist priests make, and then let them go into the river, because they're made of sand, and it's a certain type of growth that I think I've had composing music that I didn't have as a songwriter.
And I want to go back to Elasticity. Where did that song come from, and why have it come out now?
Elasticity was kind of like I had a suite of songs that all came roughly in the same amount of time, about 5-6 years ago. And Elasticity was the last one that came. Electric Yerevan was there. I think it was the second one. I don't remember the exact orders, but they all came at roughly about the same time. And because they all felt like they were rock, they had an attitude, even the mellow ones, I thought that they would kind of work for System. And for many years with System, we've tried to, write together again. So we haven't put out a record since 2006. and I thought it could work, but we couldn't see eye to eye in terms of the vision forward creatively, and what that road forward meant. So I then decided to finish the songs myself and release them as an EP. And both the single and the name of the EP is Elasticity.
You come up as an artist specifically with System of a Down in the film, but if you were starting out, let's say now, with social media, YouTube, the internet being available pretty much anywhere in anyone's pocket, how do you think that would have changed you as an artist and or System of a Down as a band?
Oh, it would change things a lot, man. I mean, we came up at a time where labels were still investing in allowing certain bands, not every band, to go out and tour and wait until having that first radio hit. We toured with Slayer, we did Ozfest on our first record. Our first record didn't have much radio love, even though in retrospect we did really well because albums were still selling at the time. That was 97. And, it's different now completely. I mean, I don't think labels spend a lot of money allowing artists to go tour before they actually make it back using radio or other platforms, social media, video, etc. These days, you kind of have to. I guess in our days, I should put it this way. In our days, I always say you have to be able to create a fire in your own backyard before burning the world down with your music. And that was for live performance. We had to play live shows and intrigue people, have a line out the door so that labels finally go, who are these guys? And, why haven't we heard of them, etc., which is how we were discovered ultimately, the right way. These days, that fire is basically your social media. You have to have enough followers. You have to have enough influence out there for labels to kind of go, oh, who is this person? Why do they have so many, likes or follows or whatever? And it is quite different. I mean, the live aspect is still there, although hasn't been around in the last few years due to COVID. But I think the live aspect will always still be there. That a good live performance, people will always spend time and money to go see. But the way that bands would get signed or artists will be discovered has really, really changed drastically.
Well, I would like to wrap up our interview. We do a thing called Pick One. The first I have for you is guitar, keyboard, or vocals. Pick one.
Guitar. Because I don't know. Because I haven't played it in a few months.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. I've been, when I compose, I'm mostly on the keys, right? So, and there are times I use the guitar for composing, but I'm mostly on keys. So yeah. That's why.
That's a great reason. I have to say the other thing I love about Truth to Power is you're so genuine and nice, and not to say that I think you're mean at all in your music, but there's definitely an aggressiveness in your songs. But you're just like this really nice down to earth guy. You're like, yeah, I get. He was just doing like the fact that you were doing like demo vocals for the first song you wrote, and that's how you got into singing is, I think, so amazing to me.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I it's funny being around music and musicians for many years. I've realized guys that put out, I shouldn't say guys, people that put out happy music are usually miserable, and people that put out really dark up music are usually pretty happy.
I think you're right. All right, next one. Los Angeles or New Zealand? Pick one.
Los Angeles?
Or no, Los Angeles. I'm sorry if it sounded weird.
Right. One
LA
is
or New
the country, Patrick. Come on.
I know. Well, I don't want to let me be fair here. I don't want to say I don't know exactly what city you live in. I don't know if you want people to know where you live in New Zealand.
I would say New Zealand. I've lived in Los Angeles most of my life. I have a lot of my friends, a lot of my work, family here. But New Zealand is where I feel the most at home.
All right, next one is singer, poet, songwriter, visual artist, activist, or composer. Pick one.
I love doing all of those things, but including painting. And mostly what I do now is painting and composing. As a visual artist, but there's something about composing that I still feel like I need to master more. That I still need to kind of get into more, get more films to score, get more diverse things to work on, and it gives me the most wide array kind of the most wide palette of doing stuff. Each film is a completely different sound. So that's kind of why, yeah.
I want to thank Serj for chatting with me, and I want to thank you for listening. To find out where to watch Truth to Power, go to the site truthtopower.oscilloscope.net. Also, please take a moment and subscribe to I'm So Obsessed on your favorite podcast app. And if you really like this episode, please rate it. Until next time, take care.